also to thank you for coming here at this evil hour. It's of course a very evil hour because today there's also like the World Climate March. So it's actually quite evil to ask us to attend this conference and not go to the World Climate March, you know. So the question is, we've been talking about stakeholders, so what's at stake? And so that's definitely something that's at stake. But as Dave yesterday put it, if we make ethical practice a norm, it will take all of the liberal qualities out of the arts. So I take advantage of that and take that as a legitimization of my lecture today. That is about the stuff that I've been doing. And I also wanted to thank Anna Beret for inviting me here. And I'm very happy to say that it's the third time that I'm invited to do something at Overgaden. So while yesterday the issue came up whether like smaller art spaces may be underappreciated to some degree, by some degree they're certainly not. And it was actually fantastic to see your presentation now, because one of the artists, I actually saw her first presentation here a couple of years ago. Lina Lau? Is that her name? Lau? I think she had a presentation here like 6 or 8 years ago, so I remember that work here. I think that's fantastic. I need a glass of water. And of course, like you have this kind of... I'm sorry. Thanks, Alex. It's like... It's, in French it's called the bouche gueule, the wooden mouth syndrome, is something that I'm experiencing now. So, I'm feeling worth. So anyway, I have...
too many drinks yesterday.
I had too many drinks yesterday, yes. That's, I take full, I acknowledge that. Then I also want to blame somebody else, thank you very much, for a little bit of a fuzzy state of mind. However, I want to blame two people, maybe more, I don't know exactly, but before I start blaming them, these are the people who were staying at Wake Up Copenhagen in room 667 here, by any chance? I take that as a no, and it's like, no problem, but I never thought, that I would at some point be the person who's like the old guy who's like living in the other room, who will be knocking against the wall and saying, oh, come on, please, guys, get it over with. But, you know, like I just need a few hours of sleep so I can. So as I kind of decided, I'm not going to be that person. So I put on my headphones and I sat in front of the computer. And so apart from blaming these people for the presentation that you're now going to get, I also want to blame Bettina, who's not here either. That's fantastic. I'm being politically correct in a very extreme way, like blaming lots of people who are not here and who cannot defend themselves, so I'm super safe. But it's also, well, no, anyway, so Bettina, when she said, so what are you going to talk yesterday at the dinner? She said, what are you going to talk about tonight? And I presented that. And later on we were talking about other stuff. She said, no, don't talk about that. Talk about what you were just telling me about. And that was going through my head because I had there's an element of frustration in this because I was hoping to be able to show something, to actually present something visually of this process that I'm working on in Hamburg, which unfortunately I just have to tell the story because we had a meeting on Wednesday and I was hoping to have some sort of product that I could present, which I can't. So you'll just have to take my word for it. But to make up for it, I'm going to show another project. So I tried to keep myself short after this lengthy introduction. There we go. So the motivation to make this claim, to reclaim social media. Sounds a little bit odd. I come from a background of working for, being educated as an artist, working for art magazines, also coming from a rural German village where pre-internet, that would be my source of information about the arts. At home we would have a book which was called The History of Art of the Abendland. That went pretty much from Byzantine art until Picasso. And then, of course, we had a big extra book on Picasso and another one on Kandinsky, and that's it. So that was my education, and it took me a long time to discover what's around. And of course, like at this time, like the information was spread by word of mouth and by looking at art magazines. So I have a little bit, you know, like it's these days it feels a little bit like you know, like talking about pornography before the internet. It's like an interest in something that just feels incredibly lame today. And one of the reasons that it feels so lame, I think, is, and I'm partly responsible. Now let's not get into this now. The reason for lameness. I would like to point out another thing, which is John Berger's ways of seeing. There's actually like a part where he's leafing through magazines in the BBC TV series. So he's basically showing how the way images are looked at have been changing. And it's a TV series from 1972. And the interesting thing is that if you look at the history of magazines, you realize that full-color glossy magazines only came up by the end of the 50s. At least in Western Europe, they might have been around in America. So this kind of photographic reproduction and the things related to it, these kind of huge glossy images of people, that would have been a relatively new medium. So actually, Berger, when he was showing these magazines, and the point he's making is like how fast you enter from one world into another. And actually, he's showing basically three subjects. One is images of extreme poverty from Bangladesh, which that's kind of the war for independence and the related economic struggle. The second part is like advertisements for luxury products, and the third part is reproductions of artworks. So these are the things. So when he's kind of flipping in between the magazines, he's saying like you're transported from one world into another at this incredible speed. And it just feels incredibly funny, and that's actually a quality about him that I find absolutely fantastic. If you watch the series today, it's a part of, you know, looking at this person and thinking like, wow, he really comes from a different age. It's incomplete, and that's a fantastic thing about this program. It's like you look at it and you see that there's something missing, the thing that's linking it to today is missing, and you have to reconstruct it. Or you have to construct it yourself as a viewer today. So I think that's a remarkable quality. And this sense of incompleteness, something that I find very inspiring. As inspiring as all of these perfect lectures that we've seen before, so if mine is a little bit incomplete, I just hope you'll be able to connect the dots yourself. So another piece that I found on an online magazine, actually a Californian online magazine called Momos, is a piece by a writer called Andrew Bernardini, a Californian writer who has a very empathic style, very gripping, and he just in like 2 weeks ago he published a piece called How to Read Art Magazines. I thought, fantastic, this is what I've been looking for, because that's actually like one of the things that I find make art magazines so lame, are actually very apparent in the whole structure, how art magazines work. So I was hoping that he would actually develop this line of argument. But the argument that he was making, which probably can be understood coming from America, saying, yeah, you're actually part of an elite the moment you pick up an art magazine, which is a good point. However, then afterwards, the rest of the text is, while at some points it touches on critical issues, it basically celebrates this part of being part of an elite, of an elect circle. And that's actually like the point where I thought we're having starting to have a huge problem there. Because also many of the art magazines that I work for, and having said that I've worked for a long time, like 15 years, sort of, I have to say that it's actually quite irritating that I've been working for them for such a long time. I'm still being paid the same amount of money for a review, so that hasn't changed. And many of them have actually grown in thickness by adding more advertisements. And so what I'm saying by making art magazines lame is, as a writer, I experience that I will make suggestions what I would like to write about, and I will get feedback by the editors saying, that's super interesting. Wouldn't you like to write about this other show instead? The reason for that being very, very obvious when you follow the art magazine over a period of time. The ads, the reviews, the lead articles, the artists who are featured, the galleries, the institutions, Basically, we're seeing something, and that feeds into the project that I want to present now. I was educated by some of the system administrators that I've been working with, that there are things called a self-stabilizing system in computing, which basically means like a software that can deal, for example, multiplayer video games, things like that, where you have a lot of information influencing each other, going around at the same time, and you actually have the software taking care of stabilizing the system. So whatever kind of thing happens, it very rarely breaks down. And that's exactly what I see happening in like things like Frieze, that over a long period of time. And I've actually been like collecting lots of magazines that I've been writing about over the last 15 years, and I've been thinking about throwing them out, frankly, because it's very irritating over this period of time to see this self-stabilizing system at work, and actually to understand that I'm actually a part of it. And actually, like, there are very few places where I feel content and confident that my voice will be heard, and it will be heard the way that I want to present it. Picking up on Sinya's MoMA presentation yesterday, and Yoko Ono presenting the microphone to articulate the voice and the cynicism of the confrontation of Yoko Ono's piece next to Kara Walker's piece, which was depicting practically a rape scene, and then you're invited to scream. I mean, you know, the question is like, what kind of place do you give somebody to articulate a voice? And the idea of the voice, articulating myself, is of course something that's very present in my work as a critic, but also something that I've been interested in as an artist. So when the guys in Hamburg asked me if I would like to do something related to the art school website, they basically asked me to contribute a couple of critical texts relating to students and former students' projects. And I said, sure, I can do that. That's what I do all the time. But then I thought, so what is actually, why do you want to do that? And they said, well, we want to increase the visibility of the Hamburg scene, you know, like we want to show like this kind of critical discourse that's happening at our art school. And I thought, yeah, but But that doesn't work that way, you know, that you have somebody else come in from outside to judge that. You should make that visible. If you have this exchange going on, you should make that visible. And so it was a very fruitful discussion that I was having there, and that led to conceptualizing something that at the moment, for lack of a better word, is still a little bit lazily called Labor, Critic and Netz. And it's basically structured around two ideas, saying that for kind of a laboratory for criticality that's happening online will allow for lots of different expressions, because it's not only about text, it should also be about images and about the idea of an artistic expression that can express itself as a form of criticality. And that's something that you could practice or reflect on, at least in an art school environment. On another level, I think it's about introducing young students, and I'm really thinking about first-year students, introducing them to criticality on an everyday basis, right? So actually, instead of, you know, like, instead of you know, like pointing out that at Facebook you can only like things and you cannot dislike things, to say, well, you know, like maybe it's not exactly like the point degree 0, but sort of like just 0.1 of criticality is actually to like something. Actually to pay attention, that's already part of a kind of a critical, let's say, consumption of things. The reflection starts later, but maybe you can start there and then start building on criticality on top of that with different formats. So to have this kind of, to actually use like this existing social media platform and try to apply it to a form of discourse that may lead to a more academic form of expression, but also to a more artistic form expression in parallel. So that's kind of the lab situation that I've been trying to introduce there. And it's taking on a lot of issues related to, example, for Facebook. A big part of the quality of this would be hosting it at the art school itself. So it won't be Facebook, it will be a different kind of software. It will be hosted at the art school itself. It will be very much about the credibility of the art school as a free and independent space. And in this sense, it kind of advocates an idea of a different and more independent forum for critical reflection. So that's the project that sadly I cannot show today because it hasn't been set up. Though it's going to happen at some point, and that's why I put my email address here, because I was thinking this has been an incredibly inspiring thing so far, and now of course I'm ruining it with my thing, but nevertheless I'd like to invite you to drop me a line, and because I'd like to include all of you in this thing, because eventually, as it will be focusing on Hamburg primarily, I think like the big potential of this is that at some point it will open up. And basically it's kind of, it will be, you know, like the independence of the art academy itself, you know, that will basically be like kind of the meta discourse running through the whole thing. Maybe I should mention briefly that after I had made this much more detailed presentation of lots of little features and things that I wanted to have in this, the system administrators at the art school said, "Oh yeah, you know, there's a tool for that, and it's called discourse." And so the thing was on Wednesday that we decided we're not going to use discourse. It's too easy. We need a more complicated solution, and they're working on that now. So it's going to be a lot more like Facebook, I hope. Yeah, so I think I'll just leave the introduction at there. I think I was also connecting this question with the idea of what artists do we want to have related to the, because of course I was looking at an institution in a wider sense, the institution of criticism, concrete, the institution of art magazines or reflective publications and forums, but also on the institution of art education. So, like the space that you create creates the art that is created for the space. At least that's my that's my experience. So kind of pushing and expanding like the walls of the space, I think is just like the inherent struggle that you have to enter if you want to work in this field. Maybe you don't have to expand it, but you'll have to negotiate it. If you don't negotiate it, it's like reality, you know, like it's like you have to establish like the beginning and the end of outlines of reality. If you don't negotiate them, you'll just stay in your comfort zone. So I put my watch here, but I forgot to actually look at it. But if there's still a bit of time, then I will try to take all of the attention away from that and try to illuminate a little bit how I would arrive at that. Because I think, you know, like I'm quite aware that I'm not reinventing, I am kind of reinventing the wheel of sorts. And that's of course a little bit meager in terms of a presentation like this. So I also wanted to give it a little bit of visual punch, and I wanted to present an earlier project. I thought it would be great actually if I would present a project that I was able to realize at Overgaden, which is a long time ago, but I found something that's even older, and I'll show that.
For 5 minutes.
Okay, then I'll be very quick. This idea of reflection and criticality, reflection of self, has a lot to do with a project that I realized in dialogue with certain situations that I found. Actually, developing it in art school when an artist took over the performance class. Actually, that was the first time there was a performance class in art school. Being Hermann Nitsch, one of the Viennese actionists, famed for slaughtering of animals during live performances, and therefore creating considerable havoc among the media. So at this strange point in time, in the late 80s, early 90s, suddenly this whole thing relating to performance as an art form was taken over and hijacked completely by a discussion about whether you would advocate the freedom of arts to go as far as to incorporate Hermann Nitsch. So thereby, by having to make the case for Hermann Nitsch, I came to this point where I decided I would actually, this is something that I'm very interested in. It's apparently this line of expressing these ideas relating to self in performance is over. I would like to do the opposite. I would like to try a kind of ready-made performance. I thought, like, okay, what's the most obvious opposite thing that you could do in terms to this kind of existential performance along the lines of Nietzsche or Abramovich and Ulay and so on and so on. And I realized that I could draw something from another interest of mine, being music and playing with rock bands. So I thought, actually, I could maybe do an Elvis impersonation. That actually includes all of the things that I'm interested in. It's a social thing. It's about involving people. It's not necessarily about putting people off. It's something that everybody can relate to, and if I do it very badly, maybe it's even going to be funny. And so it was a very kind of typical art student project, quite hilarious if you're an art student and you don't know so much stuff. So the whole thing developed a lot further when I went to Goldsmiths College in London, actually a lot in spite of being at Goldsmiths College in London, because part of the education at Goldsmiths College was that they said, well, no, that's a joke, right? That's you don't want to do that. Elvis is a working class thing. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the working class. You're not entitled to do that. And at the same time, I was, however, having a different channel of education, because when I arrived in London, the Frankfurter Rundschau asked me to do something about some Elvis-related anniversary, and I visited I found out there were several Elvis restaurants in London, so I visited them and interviewed some of the Elvis impersonators as colleagues. And one of them actually said, yeah, you know what? I have a problem. I have 3 Elvis restaurants, so I have a really hard time going from one to the other over the period of the same day. If you're an Elvis impersonator, you could take over. And that was Paul Elvis Chan of Paul Elvis Chan's Graceland's Palace on Old Kent Road, of which you can see an image here. And visiting it was actually really impressive, because if you imagine, that's Paul. And that's me. And if you're sitting in this restaurant, you're having a Chinese meal, and you're seeing all of these images of Elvis. So these are not images of Paul Elvis, it's Elvis. And so you see the discrepancy between the performer and the real thing, right? So I was like really stunned by this experience. The moment you're performing, it changes dramatically. You see mirrors. You see yourself. You see something, like that you at least on some level are aspiring to, and you're getting an audience, direct-to-audience reaction. So it actually works for you. That was kind of the amazing thing, at least for me. So I'm nearly done. So I decided that I would like to translate this whole experience. I worked there for 3 years. Over the 3 years, and I have to say 3 years, every weekend in front of a London working class audience, hen nights, stag nights, the lot. You professionalize. And the professionalization actually helped me to think, well, actually I should bring that experience back into the art world and make a show about that. And the show I called Graceland's Palace, involving several other artists whom I invited to participate, not only by introducing their work, which would reflect in parlance of 90s applications for grants, kind of working with hybrid identity and so on, that would actually incorporate like these moments of the restaurant. And I was extremely lucky that people like Yandu Zhang, for example, took over the role of the cook. The 5 artists that I invited, Yandu Zhang was a Korean artist, today also living in Seoul in Korea, took over the role of the cook and actually filled it with a lot of life as this kind of macho cook. But actually, like what was lost on many people was what he was actually cooking was a very interesting dish, and that kind of shows how they would pick up on this kind of strange subject of migration of ideas. It's a Chinese noodle dish that is very popular in Korea, but doesn't exist in China, which he topped with cheese. There you go. That's it. Thank you very much.